They say the old monastery on Mount Orinth still echoes with music, though no one has sung there for 100 years. When the wind crawls through the broken windows, it carries the sound of a choir, soft, beautiful, and wrong. Locals say those voices belong to the monks who froze to death during the Great Winter, still singing their final hymn as the world fell silent. But if you stand close enough to the chapel doors on a moonless night, you might hear them whisper your name between the verses. This is the story of the Hollow Choir.
The morning sun barely pierced the thick alpine mist as the expedition team emerged from the tree line, eyes fixed on the looming silhouette of the monastery nestled high in the mountains. Tutor Marcus Hale led the group, his lean frame bundled tightly against the biting cold. His sharp eyes scanned the ancient stone facade, its weathered walls stained by centuries of frost and neglect. The silence that surrounded the place was profound, broken only by the faintest whisper of a chant that seemed to ripple through the crisp air. "You hear that?" Elena Voss whispered, shading her eyes against the pale light. Her dark hair was tucked beneath a woolen cap, but her expressive eyes held a mix of wonder and unease. She listened as the ethereal sound wove through the empty valley, a haunting melody that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Jonas Reed, the group's logistics coordinator and skeptic, scowled beneath his thick beard. "Probably just the wind playing tricks," he muttered, adjusting the straps on his pack. His muscular frame radiated a tension that matched the chill in the air, his eyes wary as he surveyed the monastery's imposing gates. Marcus Engel, the seasoned mountaineer guiding the team, led the way up the crumbling stone steps. His boots echoed hollowly, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the vastness within. Behind him, Lena Moritz followed closely, her keen eyes darting to the faded inscriptions etched into the stone archways. Beside her, Sylvia Klein adjusted her instruments, the small recorder hanging from her neck, ready to capture any anomalies. The heavy wooden doors groaned as Marcus pushed them open, revealing the monastery's main hall. The temperature dropped sharply inside, the cold biting through their layers. Dust motes floated in the shafts of pale light that filtered through stained glass windows, casting broken patterns on the cracked stone floor. Empty pews stood like silent sentinels, their surfaces scared by time. A sudden swell of chanting rose, soft yet undeniably present. The voices were disembodied, ethereal, weaving a chorus that sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. He swallowed hard, the familiar rationality that anchored him now challenged by this inexplicable phenomenon. "No bodies," Marcus murmured, moving carefully between the rows, his eyes scanning for any sign of life or death. "If these are the monks, where are they?" Elena stepped forward, her gaze distant as she closed her eyes, attempting to attune herself to the spiritual resonance of the place. Her lips parted slightly, and she began to hum softly, trying to mimic the chant. The sound blended with the ambient chorus, a fragile thread seeking connection to the unseen. Jonas's voice cut through the moment. "This place gives me the creeps. I don't like that no one's here, but the voices are still singing. It's as if the monastery itself remembers them," Marcus replied, his voice steady but shadowed with doubt. "Or worse, something else remembers." The team spread out, exploring the adjacent chambers and corridors. Marcus led them cautiously through narrow passageways, his experience evident as he navigated loose stones and icy patches. Lena's fingers traced the worn surfaces of ancient inscriptions, her breath catching as she glimpsed cryptic symbols hinting at a dark past. Sylvia Klein set up her equipment in the main hall, eyes flicking between readings and the haunting chants. "There's something unusual about the acoustics," she noted. "The voices don't seem to originate from any physical source. It's as if the sound is embedded in the stone itself." The group reconvened in a small chapel, the air thick with a cold that felt almost unnatural. Marcus pulled out his notebook, scribbling observations even as a creeping unease settled over him. The chanting continued, a spectral lullaby that refused to fade. Night approached swiftly in the mountains, And as the team prepared their modest camp within the monastery's walls, the chants grew louder, more insistent. Marcus felt the weight of centuries pressing down, the silence between the notes pregnant with menace. Elena's expression was somber as she whispered, "This place is alive with faith and fear." Jonas shook his head, lighting a small fire. "Faith won't keep us safe here. We need answers." But the monastery offered none, only the endless echo of voices without bodies, a hollow choir that sang of vanished souls and frozen dread. And as the cold night deepened, Marcus understood that their arrival had awoken something old, something waiting patiently to be heard and feared. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faintest hint of a lament that would not be silenced. The morning sun filtered weakly through the narrow, stained glass windows of the ancient monastery, casting fragmented colors across the cold stone floor. The expedition team gathered in the great hall, their breaths visible in the frigid air, the silence punctuated only by the faintest, most elusive chanting. Dra. Marcus Hale stood near the center, notebook in hand, eyes sharp despite the creeping exhaustion etched on his face. "Listen," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible over the eerie murmur. She closed her eyes, tilting her head as if seeking communion with the invisible choir. The chanting seemed to swell, voices rising and falling in a haunting melody that seemed to emanate not from any single place, but from everywhere and nowhere at once. Jonah's reed shifted uneasily, his arms folded across his chest. "It's just acoustics, echoes bouncing off the stone. Maybe some kind of trick of the wind or our minds playing games. There's no such thing as ghosts, no hidden choir." His tone was sharp, laced with frustration. Marcus glanced at Jonas, a brief flicker of irritation in his eyes. "Dismiss what you will, but we're here to document, not debate. Keep an open mind." The team split to explore, moving methodically through the monastery's labyrinthine corridors. Elena lingered near a cold stone wall, her hands tracing the ancient carvings worn by centuries. "These inscriptions," she murmured, "they speak of devotion beyond death, a faith so absolute it consumed the monks entirely." Lena Moritz knelt by a fractured altar, her fingers trembling as she traced the faded script. "It's a dialect I've never seen, but parts match old rites from obscure sects. There's mention of voices, eternal singing, and a pact something forbidden." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of dread. "Dra." Sylvia Klein adjusted her equipment, headphones pressed to her ears as she recorded the chanting. "The acoustic signatures are unlike anything I've encountered. Frequencies overlap and distort, creating patterns that seem almost intentional. It's as if the building itself is a vessel for this sound." As the day wore on, the chanting grew louder, more intricate. The voices at times seemed angelic, pure and hopeful, but then they twisted into something grotesque, a dissonance that sent shivers down the spine. The team's unease deepened. Marcus scribbled notes furiously, struggling to reconcile his rational mind with the mounting supernatural evidence. Elena's eyes fluttered open suddenly as if awakened from a trance. "It's not just sound," she said softly. "It's a call, a prayer and a warning intertwined. They want us to hear, but not to come closer." Jonas scoffed, "Or it's a trap. I say we keep our guard up, not start chanting along." Despite the growing tension, the team pressed on, exploring deeper chambers where relics hinted at the monastery's sinister past. A tarnished chalice inscribed with the same cryptic symbols, fragments of manuscripts soaked in age and despair, and faded frescoes depicting monks locked in eternal song. The chanting seemed to follow them, echoing through every corridor, a spectral presence that defied logic. At one point, Marcus paused in a corridor where the walls seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing. He shivered, the cold not entirely from the alpine chill. "Do you feel that?" Elena whispered, clutching his arm. The voices, they re-alive. Jonas grimaced, "Alive or not, this place is messing with our heads." As daylight waned, the team gathered once more in the great hall. The chanting had reached a crescendo, swirling around them in a vortex of sound, beautiful yet terrifying. Elena began to hum softly, trying to mimic the melody, her eyes distant and luminous. Marcus watched her, torn between admiration and fear. "Be careful, Elena. Don't let it consume you." She smiled faintly, a gesture both reassuring and unsettling. "I think we need to listen more closely to understand. The voices hold the truth, even if it's dreadful." Jonas shook his head, muttering curses under his breath. "Truth or madness, it's all the same if we don't survive this." The night closed in, the monastery swallowing the last light. The chanting echoed louder, a siren call that promised revelation and ruin. Marcus's pen hesitated above his notebook. The mystery deepened, and the expedition's fragile cohesion began to crack beneath the weight of the unseen choir. Outside, the wind howled through the Alps, carrying the faintest echo of a song that would not die. Inside, the expedition faced the intangible horror of faith twisted beyond reason, a melody echoing through stone, beckoning them ever deeper into the frozen heart of fear. The cold stone floor of the monastery's central chamber was stained only by dust and time. Drr. Marcus Hale knelt down, brushing his gloved hand over the rough surface, eyes scanning carefully for any indication, any sign of what had become of the monks who once filled these halls with life and devotion. Around him, the rest of the expedition moved silently, their breaths visible in the frigid air, faces tight with an unspoken unease. "Nothing," Marcus finally murmured, standing and rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "No bones, no relics, no trace of a burial. It's as if they simply vanished." Elena Voss, standing near a narrow, stained glass window that filtered pale light into the chamber, shivered slightly. Yet the chanting, it still lingers. How can voices persist without bodies? Her voice was soft, almost reverent, but edged with a tremor. Jonas Reed folded his arms, scowling. "We're chasing ghosts, that's what this is. Spectral noise in empty halls. There's a rational explanation. We just haven't found it yet." The tension between belief and skepticism was palpable. Marcus, though himself a skeptic at heart, felt the weight of the inexplicable pressing upon him more heavily with each passing moment. Meanwhile, Lena Moritz sat cross-legged in the corner of a smaller chamber, surrounded by scattered fragments of parchment and leather-bound volumes. Her eyes, sharp and focused, scanned the faded Latin and cryptic symbols with a mixture of fascination and dread. "These texts," she said quietly, "describe a ritual, one that the monks performed in secret. It speaks of a pact, a sacrifice of the body to transcend mortality." The words are fragmented, but the implication is clear. They gave up their physical forms to become something else. Elena moved closer, her gaze intense. "Is that why their voices remain? Because their souls are trapped here?" Lena nodded slowly, her fingers trembling as she turned another fragile page. In the main hall, Dra. Sylvia Klein busied herself with an array of recording devices, placing microphones strategically along the cold stone walls. Her brow furrowed as she listened back through headphones, eyes darting between readouts and the eerie, layered chanting that seemed to envelop the monastery. "The acoustics here are anomalous," she said, voice low and measured. "The chants aren't just echoes. There are distortions, harmonics that shouldn't exist in natural reverberation. It's as if the space itself is manipulating sound." Jonas rolled his eyes. "Sounds like you, re-giving the place too much credit. It's just weird echoes. People want to believe in ghosts because it's easier than facing reality." Elena's eyes flashed with quiet anger. "Not everything can be explained by logic, Jonas. You dismiss what you don't understand." Marcus stepped between them, raising a hand to quell the rising argument. "Enough, we need to focus. This place is affecting us all in different ways. We can't afford fractures now." As night fell, the chanting grew louder, weaving through the stone corridors like a living thing. Shadows danced in the flickering lantern light, and the oppressive silence between the echoes felt suffocating. Marcus sat alone in his journal, meticulously recording every detail, every unease, hoping to tether his unraveling thoughts to something concrete. Outside, the wind howled through the alpine peaks, but inside the monastery, a colder, deeper chill settled one that seeped into bones and minds alike. The vanishing monks had left behind only their voices and a mystery that threatened to consume those who dared to seek the truth. As Marcus closed his notebook for the night, a faint whisper seemed to brush his ear, not spoken, but sung a fragment of a chant that promised both salvation and doom. He shivered, not from the cold but from a growing fear that the answers they sought might be far darker than any of them had imagined. The frozen wind outside the monastery whispered against the thick stone walls, carrying with it the faintest trace of the chants that had haunted the explorers since their arrival. Inside the dim chapel, the flicker of a dying candle cast long shadows across the cold, worn stone floor. Dra. Marcus Hale stood alone, his breath visible in the chill air, eyes fixed on the altar where centuries of devotion had once been poured out. The silence was fractured only by a distant, ethereal chanting that seemed to seep from the very walls. Marcus's fingers tightened around the leather strap of his satchel, the weight of his notes and recordings feeling suddenly insignificant against the oppressive stillness. He had felt it before, the creeping sensation that rationality would fail here, but nothing prepared him for what came next. The temperature dropped sharply, a biting cold that gnawed at his skin and sank deep into his bones. And then, from the periphery of his vision, a figure emerged. Father Ambrose. The apparition was unmistakable, a wraith-like form clad in ancient monastic robes, his hollow eyes reflecting centuries of sorrow and duty. He did not speak. No words passed his lips, yet the message was clear, urgent, and ominous. Marcus's heart hammered in his chest as the ghostly abbot raised a hand in a gesture both warning and pleading before slowly dissolving into the shadows. Leaving behind a silence even heavier than before, Marcus staggered back, clutching the altar for support. His mind raced, struggling to reconcile the apparition with his skepticism. Was this a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and isolation, or something far more real? The weight of the monastery's secrets pressed down on him, threatening to crush the thin veneer of scientific detachment he clung to. Elsewhere in the monastery, Elena Voss stood at the foot of the altar. Her dark eyes closed as she softly hummed the haunting chants that seemed to flow endlessly through the corridors. The music stirred something deep within her, a spiritual resonance that both comforted and terrified. She had always been the quiet heart of the expedition, her empathy and intuition balancing Marcus's analytical mind and Jonas's blunt pragmatism. Yet now, even she felt the growing shadow cast by the Choa's spectral presence. Elena's voice wavered as she matched the melodic echoes, trying to reach out to understand. Her past losses intertwined with the monastery's mournful song, weaving a tapestry of grief and hope that left her trembling. She opened her eyes to find Marcus nearby, his face pale and drawn, haunted by the encounter he had just endured. "Did you see it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the faint chant. Marcus nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "Father Ambrose, he warned me." Before Elena could respond, the heavy footsteps of Jonas Reed aired down the stone corridor, breaking the fragile moment. Jonas's scowl deepened as he approached, arms crossed, eyes sharp and unyielding. "Warning," Jonas scoffed, voice low but edged with contempt. "More like stress-induced hallucinations. We were all on edge, Marcus. This place plays tricks on the mind." Marcus met his gaze, the tension between them palpable. "And yet you refuse to consider anything beyond your skepticism. There's something here, Jonas, something real. What ghosts? Spirits?" Jonas shook his head, frustration mounting. "We need to stay grounded, not chase shadows." The argument simmered, a clash of belief and doubt rippling through the team. The chants swelled faintly, a spectral chorus threading its way through the stone, binding the explorers in a web of unease. That night, in the sparse safety of their makeshift camp within the monastery's cloister, the team gathered, voices hushed but charged with tension. Marcus detailed his encounter, Elena spoke of her spiritual connection, and Jonas warned against surrendering to superstition. The air was thick with fear and uncertainty, the invisible presence of Father Ambrose lingering like a shadow at the edges of their consciousness. As sleep eluded them, the echoing chants wove through their dreams and waking hours alike, a chilling reminder that in this place, the line between reality and the supernatural was perilously thin. The warning had been delivered not in words, but in silence heavy with meaning, and the expedition stood at a crossroads. To ignore it would be to invite doom. To heed it might mean unraveling secrets better left buried. Outside, the wind howled through the Alps, and the hollow choir sang on, its voices both angelic and grotesque, beckoning the explorers deeper into the frozen heart of the monastery's dark mystery. The night stretched endlessly, and Marcus found himself staring once more into the shadows, wondering whether salvation lay in flight or in confronting the spectral choir that sought to claim them all. But one thing was certain: the haunting presence of Father Ambrose was no mere apparition. It was a harbinger of the horrors to come, and the expedition's fragile unity would soon be tested as never before. The echoing chants grew louder still, promising that the silence of the monastery was only the prelude to a far darker symphony. The air in the monastery's scriptorium was thick with dust and the faint metallic tang of cold stone. Flickering shadows cast by their lanterns danced across the walls lined with ancient shelves, heavy with forgotten tomes and brittle parchments. Lena Moritz knelt over a low wooden table, her gloved hands trembling slightly as she carefully unrolled a fragile manuscript, the parchment crackling softly in the oppressive stillness. "Look at this, Marcus," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant, haunting chants that wove through the corridors. Her dark eyes scanned the faded Latin script, punctuated by cryptic symbols and blots of dried ink. These texts, they speak of a binding ritual, a pact made not just of faith, but of sacrifice. Druta Marcus Hale leaned in, his sharp eyes narrowing as he traced the faded words with a careful finger. "A cult-like devotion," he murmured, the historian's analytical mind racing. They sought transcendence beyond the mortal coil. But at what cost? The faint chanting that had been their constant companion throughout the monastery shifted subtly. The once distant and ethereal voices took on a new quality, at times soaring with an almost angelic purity, then twisting abruptly into something grotesque and dissonant, like the strain of torn wings. The sound filled the chamber, pressing in on them from every angle, a sound both beautiful and monstrous. Alina Voss stood nearby, her eyes closed as she hummed softly, attempting to match the pitch and rhythm of the choir. "They're trying to communicate," she said softly, her voice barely above a breath. "This isn't just noise, it's a language, a prayer perhaps, or a warning." Across the room, Juta Sylvia Klein adjusted her recording equipment with a frown. "A language or an acoustic anomaly?" she asked skeptically. These shifts in tone could be explained by structural resonance or sound reflections. "I'm gathering data, but so far, the phenomenon is consistent with known acoustic effects." Marcus's gaze snapped to Sylvia, frustration flickering across his face. "Sylvia, this isn't just about sound. The manuscripts describe a ritual that bound the monks' souls to this place. The chanting is their eternal echo, trapped between worlds. You can't explain that with science alone." Elena's eyes opened, dark and intense. "It's faith, Marcus. The devotion that consumed them. The pact was a sacrifice of the body to preserve their voices forever. It's horrifying, but it's also a testament to their belief." Sylvia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Faith without evidence is superstition. We need to remain objective." The tension between the spiritual and the scientific widened, fracturing the fragile unity of the team. Marcus's stubborn rationality clashed with Elena's growing spiritual acceptance, while Sylvia's pragmatic skepticism challenged them both. Lena returned her attention to the manuscripts. "There's more," she said softly. "Mentions of a hollow choir collective bound in suffering and song. The monks believed their voices would outlast their flesh, but the texts hint at torment rather than salvation." A shiver ran through the room, the cold seeping deeper into their bones as the chants rose in an eerie crescendo. The voices seemed to swirl around them, a living presence that was at once alluring and repulsive. Marcus closed his notebook with a snap. We were standing on the edge of something terrible. The manuscripts confirm it. These monks were consumed by their own devotion, trapped in a limbo that defies death. And now, we were caught in the same place. Elena reached out, her hand brushing a faded symbol on the manuscript. Perhaps understanding this is the first step to freeing them, or ourselves. But as the choir's voices twisted again, oscillating between the sacred and the profane, the team could only wonder if some mysteries were better left buried in the cold silence of the mountains. The monastery seemed to hold its breath, the stone walls absorbing their fear as the chants echoed on both a hymn and a curse. "We need to keep moving," Marcus said, voice low but resolute. "The manuscripts have given us answers, but also more questions, and the choir is watching." Outside the scriptorium, the cold wind howled, carrying the hollow choir's unending song into the frozen night. As they prepared to leave, none of them noticed the faintest flicker of a shadow at the edge of the chamber, a robed figure with hollow eyes, watching silently, waiting.